Hello and welcome to ZzScience. I'm glad you're here. Take a moment to relax, let your body settle, and let your mind slow down. If you'd like, you can share in the comments where you're listening from. For now, let's slow things down and begin. The human brain is a quiet builder, shaping unseen boundaries in the dark. It doesn't announce what it's doing or pause to ask permission. It simply moves through the world, collecting details, estimating distance, weighing risk. And somewhere inside that constant work, fear begins to form, not as a threat, but as a soft voice. A small pull at the edge of awareness, a reminder that the body is delicate, that the world is wide, and that survival asks us to pay attention. Fear is not a defect in who we are. It isn't a flaw woven into our biology. It is a kind of gift, though most of the time it doesn't feel that way. When your heart speeds up, when your hands grow warm and damp, when your thoughts drift toward what if and worst case possibilities, it can feel as if something is wrong, as if the mind has turned against you. But the truth is much quieter. Fear is simply the brain carrying out its oldest task, keeping you aware, keeping you safe, keeping you present in the moment. Long before language, before calendars or cities or clocks, fear was already part of us. Our ancestors lived in a world that was beautiful and unforgiving at the same time, a world stretching outward with both nourishment and danger. There were no doors to lock, no shelters to retreat into, no numbers to call for help. Survival depended entirely on the body's ability to read the environment, to sense what was safe and what was not, to move toward food and away from harm. The brain evolved in this world. Every structure, every pathway, every chemical signal was shaped by millions of years of trial and error. And fear became one of the most essential tools in the brain's repertoire. Because the individuals who felt fear, who hesitated before stepping into the tall grass, who listened to the quiet unease in their gut, were the ones who survived. They were the ones who lived long enough to pass their genes forward. And so, fear was woven into the fabric of human consciousness, not as punishment, but as protection. At the center of this system is a small almond-shaped region deep within the brain called the amygdala. It's ancient, evolutionarily speaking. It exists in many animals, from birds to mammals, and its job has remained consistent across species and across time. The amygdala is a sentinel. It scans the environment constantly, filtering through sensory information, looking for anything that might signal danger. A shadow moving too quickly, a sound that doesn't belong, a face that looks angry or unpredictable. The amygdala doesn't think, it doesn't reason, it simply reacts. When the amygdala detects a potential threat, it sends out an alarm. This alarm travels through the brain faster than conscious thought. It reaches the hypothalamus, which in turn activates the body's stress response. The heart begins to beat faster, pumping blood to the muscles. The lungs expand, pulling in more oxygen. The pupils dilate, sharpening vision. The digestive system slows down, conserving energy for more immediate needs. All of this happens in a fraction of a second, long before you've had time to consciously register what's happening. You feel the fear before you understand it. This is the beauty of the system. It doesn't wait for analysis. It doesn't pause to consider context or probability. It acts immediately, because in the world our ancestors inhabited, hesitation could mean death. If you heard a rustle in the bushes, you didn't stop to wonder whether it was the wind or a predator. You moved, you ran, you survived. And the ones who paused too long to think didn't make it into the fossil record. But here's where the story becomes more nuanced, more layered. Fear is not just about immediate physical danger. It's not only about tigers in the grass or cliffs at the edge of vision. Fear is also about memory, about learning, about the brain's remarkable ability to connect the dots between past and present, to recognize patterns and predict outcomes. And this is where fear becomes both more sophisticated and more complicated. Imagine for a moment a child who touches a hot stove. The pain is immediate and sharp. The child pulls their hand back, crying, the skin red and burning. That single experience creates a memory, a vivid imprint in the brain that links the stove with pain. The next time the child is near a stove, they feel fear. Not because the stove is currently burning them, but because the brain remembers. It has learned. And it uses that learning to guide behavior, to keep the child from making the same mistake twice. This is fear as teacher, fear as protector. The brain takes raw experience and transforms it into knowledge, into a fear. Kind of emotional shorthand that helps us navigate the world more safely. And this process happens constantly, quietly, beneath the surface of conscious awareness. Every time you flinch at a loud noise, every time you feel nervous in a dark parking lot, every time you hesitate before making a risky decision, your brain is drawing on a vast library of past experiences, of learned associations, of moments when you felt unsafe or uncertain or in pain. But memory is not perfect. It's not a video recording that plays back exactly as events occurred. Memory is reconstructive. It's shaped by emotion, by context, by the stories we tell ourselves about what happened and why. And fear has a special relationship with memory. Fearful experiences tend to be remembered more vividly, more persistently than neutral or positive ones. This makes evolutionary sense. If you narrowly escaped danger once, it's crucial that you remember the details so you can avoid that danger in the future. The brain prioritizes fearful memories because they contain survival-relevant information. This is why a single traumatic event can echo through a lifetime. Why a person who was bitten by a dog as a child might feel anxious around dogs decades later, even if they consciously know that most dogs are harmless. The fear isn't irrational. It's the brain being cautious, perhaps overly cautious, but always with the same underlying motivation: to keep you safe. And yet, the world we live in now is vastly different from the world that shaped our brains. We no longer live in small groups, hunting and gathering, constantly exposed to the elements and to predators. We live in cities with locks and laws and emergency services. We have roofs over our heads, food in our refrigerators, medicine for our illnesses. Physical danger, while still present, is relatively rare for most people in most places. But the brain doesn't know this. The amygdala hasn't updated its software to match our modern environment. It still operates according to ancient logic, still scans for threats with the same vigilance our ancestors needed. This is why we can feel afraid of things that aren't actually dangerous. Why we might feel our heart race before giving a presentation, even though there's no physical threat involved. Why we might feel anxious about social situations, about judgment, about failure. The brain has learned to apply the fear response not just to predators and cliffs, but to anything that threatens our well-being in a broader sense. Our social standing, our sense of competence, our need for connection and belonging. Because humans are social creatures, we evolved not just to survive physical threats, but to thrive within groups. And being rejected by the group, being cast out or ostracized, was, in our ancestral environment, a serious threat to survival. A person alone had little chance of making it through harsh winters, of defending against predators, of raising children successfully. So, the brain learnt to fear social rejection almost as much as physical danger. It learned to monitor constantly for signs of disapproval, for threats to status or connection. And this fear, like all fear, is protective. It motivates us to behave in ways that maintain our relationships, that keep us safe within the social fabric. But sometimes the brain makes mistakes. Sometimes it sees threats where none exist. Sometimes the alarm goes off even when there's nothing to run from, nothing to fight, nothing to fear. This is the experience of anxiety. It's fear without a clear object, fear that seems to come from nowhere, fear that doesn't make sense given the actual circumstances. And this can be deeply confusing, even distressing. It can feel like the mind is malfunctioning, like something is broken. But even anxiety, uncomfortable as it is, has roots in the same protective mechanism. The brain is trying to keep you safe. It's just being overzealous, casting too wide a net, responding to internal signals and ambiguous cues as if they were clear and present dangers. The system that evolved to detect predators is now detecting potential problems in your work project, in your relationships, in your health, in your future. It's extrapolating from incomplete information, imagining scenarios, running simulations of what could go wrong. And here's something important to understand. The brain is not good at distinguishing between imagined threats and real ones. When you worry about something that might happen tomorrow, your body responds as if it's happening now. The heart rate increases, the stress hormones flow, the muscles tense, because to the ancient parts of your brain, thinking about danger is almost the same as experiencing danger. The simulation feels real, and so the fear feels real, even when the threat exists only in thought. This is both a strength and a weakness. It's a strength because it allows us to plan, to anticipate, to prepare for potential problems before they arise. If you can imagine what might go wrong, you can take steps to prevent it. You can check the weather before you leave the house. You can save money for emergencies. You can practice for the presentation that makes you nervous. Fear, in this sense, motivates caution and preparation. It helps us avoid preventable problems. But it's a weakness because the brain can become stuck in this mode of anticipation, of endless what-ifs, of catastrophizing. It can lose the ability to distinguish between likely and unlikely threats, between productive caution and paralyzing worry. And when this happens, fear stops being protective and starts being restrictive. It stops being a useful signal and starts being background noise, a constant hum of anxiety that colors everything. Yet even in these moments, it's important to remember that the brain is not your enemy. It's not trying to make you miserable. It's just doing its job a little too well, applying ancient patterns to modern problems, trying to keep you safe in the only way it knows how. And understanding this, truly feeling the truth of it, can be softening. It can create a little space between you and the fear, a little room to breathe. Because when you understand that fear is a biological process, an evolutionary inheritance, a protective mechanism that sometimes misfires, you can begin to relate to it differently. You can see it not as a personal failing, not as evidence that something is wrong with you, but as a natural feature of having a brain that cares about your survival. You can thank the fear for trying to help, even as you gently remind it that you're okay, that the threat it perceives is not as dangerous as it believes. And this brings us to something deeply important, the role of the thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, in regulating fear. The amygdala may sound the alarm, but it doesn't have the final say. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning and planning and decision-making, can step in and modulate the fear response. It can assess the situation more carefully, weigh the evidence, consider context. It can send signals back down to the amygdala, essentially saying, It's okay. We've looked at this more closely. We're safe. This is the basis of so many calming practices. Deep breathing, progressive relaxation, mindfulness. These practices don't eliminate fear. They don't shut down the amygdala, but they engage the prefrontal cortex. They activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest counterbalance to the fight or flight response. They create a physiological environment in which the brain can recalibrate, can shift from high alert to a state of calm observation. And over time, with practice, this process becomes easier. The pathways in the brain become more established, more automatic. The brain learns, through repetition, that certain situations are safe, even though they once seemed threatening. This is the principle behind exposure therapy, behind the gradual facing of fears. Each time you encounter something that frightens you and survive the experience without harm, you're teaching your brain to update its threat assessment. You're creating new memories, new associations, new evidence that says, this is uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous. But it's important to approach this with gentleness, with patience. Change doesn't happen overnight. The brain is cautious about updating its fear responses because those responses have kept you alive. It needs consistent, repeated evidence before it's willing to lower the alarm. And this is okay. This is how it should be. Survival is the brain's first priority, and it's not going to abandon its protective strategies without good reason. So we find ourselves in this interesting position, living with brains that are exquisitely designed to keep us safe, but not always well calibrated to the specific challenges of modern life. We carry within us the legacy of millions of years of evolution, of ancestors who survived by being vigilant, by being cautious, by erring on the side of fear, when the cost of a false alarm was so much lower than the cost of missing a real threat. And this is why fear is so universal, so deeply human. Everyone experiences it. Everyone has moments when the heart races, when the mind fills with worry, when the body tenses in anticipation of danger. This is not weakness. This is not failure. This is the human condition. This is what it means to have a nervous system that evolved to protect you, to keep you alive, to give you every possible advantage in a world that was, for most of our history, genuinely dangerous. Here, in this moment, you are safe. The body can loosen its grip. The breath can slow down. The mind can gently settle. The fear that lives within you, that old inheritance of caution and watchfulness, can soften a little. It doesn't have to vanish or be defeated. It only needs to be noticed, understood, and kindly reminded that right now, in this present moment, there is nothing to escape, nothing to resist, nothing that needs fixing. The brain creates fear because it is trying to protect you, because it wants your story to continue. It cannot imagine the world without you in it, so it watches carefully, and it waits, and it raises the alarm whenever it senses even the faint outline of a threat. This is its way of caring for you, its way of saying, you matter, your life is important, I will do everything I can to keep you here. And maybe, with that understanding, you can meet your fear with a little more softness, with a bit more patience for the racing heart, the heavy thoughts, the tension resting in your shoulders. You may begin to see these sensations not as signs of failure, but as evidence of a brain doing its best to protect you, working with what it knows, in the only way it has learned. The relationship between fear and perception is one of the most quietly profound aspects of how we experience reality. Fear doesn't just make us feel a certain way, it subtly shapes the world we move through. It changes what we notice, what we pay attention to, and what fades into the background. It colors our senses, adjusting the tone of experience itself as though reality is passing through a lens touched by caution and concern. When the brain shifts into a state of fear, even a mild one, even the slightest trace of unease, it begins to prioritize certain kinds of information over others. This happens automatically, without effort and without our awareness. The visual system becomes more sensitive to movement, to faces, especially to faces that look angry or threatening. The auditory system becomes more alert to sudden sounds, to small changes in volume or pitch that might signal danger. The body's sensory network turns up the sensitivity on anything that could matter for survival, while gently dimming everything else. This is part of the reason why time can feel slower during frightening moments, why a car accident or a sudden fall can seem stretched out, almost as if it is unfolding frame by frame. The brain is not actually slowing the world down. It is processing more information in a shorter span of time, gathering details as quickly as it can, because in that moment, accuracy can matter. The more clearly a threat can be perceived, the better the chances of responding effectively. So the brain pours resources into perception, attention, processing power, awareness, trying to extract every useful signal from the environment. But this heightened state comes with trade-offs. When the brain locks onto potential danger, it becomes less capable of noticing other things. It becomes less attuned to beauty, less able to handle complex information, and less inclined toward creative or abstract thinking. The field of attention narrows, peripheral vision decreases, subtle, nuanced thought recedes into the background. This effect is often described as tunnel vision, and in an evolutionary sense, it is intentional. When you are running from a predator, you do not need to admire the horizon or reflect on philosophy. You need to focus on escape, on safety, on the single immediate task directly in front of you. In modern life, though, this narrowing of attention can become problematic, because most of the things we fear today don't require running or fighting. They require thinking, planning, communicating, understanding nuance and context. And fear makes all of that harder. When you're anxious about a work presentation, your narrowed attention makes it harder to read the room, to think on your feet, to access the full range of your knowledge and skills. When you're worried about a relationship, your threat-focused perception makes you more likely to notice criticism and less likely to notice affection, more likely to interpret ambiguous comments negatively and less likely to give the other person the benefit of the doubt. This is one of the ways fear can become self-perpetuating. It changes perception in ways that seem to confirm the fear. If you're afraid that people don't like you, you'll be hypervigilant for signs of rejection. And because the brain is so good at finding what it's looking for, you'll find those signs. You'll notice the person who didn't smile back, who seemed distracted during your conversation, who didn't laugh at your joke. And you'll overlook or downplay all the evidence to the contrary, all the people who did engage warmly, who seemed genuinely happy to see you. The fear shapes what you see, and what you see reinforces the fear. Breaking this cycle requires awareness. It requires catching yourself in the act of selective attention, of threat-focused perception, and gently widening the lens. Asking yourself, what else is true? What am I not noticing because I'm so focused on this one thing? This isn't about positive thinking or forcing yourself to see the world through rose-colored glasses. It's simply about accuracy, about getting a more complete picture of reality. Because when fear is running the show, your perception is skewed. Not in some mystical or metaphorical way, but in a very real, neurobiologically measurable way. And here's something fascinating. The brain's fear system is particularly sensitive to ambiguity. When a situation is clearly dangerous, like a fire or an oncoming car, the response is straightforward. Fight or flight. Run, hide, escape. But when a situation is unclear, when the threat is potential rather than immediate, when you can't tell whether something is dangerous or safe, the amygdala tends to err on the side of caution. It assumes threat until proven otherwise. This makes evolutionary sense. In our ancestral environment, the cost of assuming something was safe when it was actually dangerous could be fatal. But the cost of assuming something was dangerous when it was actually safe was usually just wasted energy, a false alarm. So natural selection favored brains that were biased toward caution, that interpreted ambiguous situations as potentially threatening. Better to run from 100 harmless shadows than to fail to run from one real predator. But in modern life, we're surrounded by ambiguity. We send a text and don't get an immediate response, and we don't know what it means. Is the person busy? Angry? No longer interested in talking to us? The lack of information, the ambiguity itself, can trigger anxiety. We receive vague feedback at work, and our minds fill in the gaps, usually not in our favor. We notice a change in someone's behavior, a shift in tone or energy, and we worry about what it might mean. The brain's ancient bias toward caution kicks in, and we find ourselves anxious about situations that may be perfectly benign. Learning to tolerate ambiguity, to sit with not knowing, is one of the most valuable skills for managing fear and anxiety. Because so much of life is ambiguous. So many situations lack clear answers or definite outcomes. And if your brain is constantly treating ambiguity as threat, you'll spend a great deal of time in a state of unnecessary alarm. But if you can train yourself to notice the ambiguity, to recognize it as ambiguity rather than danger, to remind yourself that unclear doesn't mean bad, you can give your nervous system a chance to settle. You can interrupt the automatic leap from not knowing to catastrophe. This is part of what mindfulness practices cultivate. The ability to be present with uncertainty, with discomfort, with the rawness of experience before the mind has labeled it good or bad, safe or dangerous. When you can observe your own fear without immediately believing it or acting on it, you create space. Space to respond rather than react. Space to engage the thinking brain, to bring in context and perspective. Space to remember that you've been afraid before and survived. That your track record of getting through difficult days is 100%. But none of this means that fear is something to be eliminated or transcended. Fear is part of being alive, part of being human, part of having a body that can be hurt and a mind that knows it. And there's something almost tender about this when you really sit with it. The fact that you can feel afraid is evidence that you care about your life, that you want to continue, that existence matters to you. Fear is, in its own way, an expression of love. Love of life, love of self, love of the people and things and experiences that make life worthwhile. Even the fear of death, which is perhaps the deepest fear, the fear that underlies so many other fears, is really just the flip side of the desire to live, the wish to continue, to see what happens next, to be present for the people you love, to experience more of what this strange and beautiful existence has to offer. And while fear of death can be paralyzing, can cast a shadow over everything, it can also be a reminder. A reminder that time is finite, that this moment matters, that the people around you won't be here forever, and neither will you. The Buddhist traditions speak about this with great clarity and compassion. The recognition of impermanence, of the inevitability of loss and change and ending, is not meant to be depressing. It's meant to be liberating. Because when you truly accept that everything is temporary, including your own life, you can stop trying to hold on so tightly. You can relax a little. you can appreciate what's here now without constantly worrying about what might be lost later. The fear doesn't disappear, but it becomes workable. It becomes part of the texture of life, rather than something to be avoided at all costs. And this brings us back to the body, to the felt experience of fear. Because fear is not just a thought, not just a belief or an interpretation. It's a physical experience. A sensation in the chest, tightness in the throat, a fluttering in the stomach, a trembling in the hands. And these sensations, uncomfortable as they are not dangerous. They're just sensations. The activation of the sympathetic nervous system, the release of adrenaline and cortisol, the increased heart rate and respiration, all of these are designed to mobilize energy, to prepare the body for action. They feel intense because they're meant to get your attention, to spur you into movement. But when there's nothing to run from, nowhere to go, no action to take, these sensations just sit in the body, and they can feel overwhelming, especially if you're afraid of the fear itself. If you're worried that the sensations mean something is terribly wrong. This is the root of panic disorder, the fear of fear, the terror that the physical sensations of anxiety are signs of heart attack or loss of control or impending doom. But they're not. They're just your body doing its job, perhaps too enthusiastically, but always with the intention of protecting you. Learning to be with these sensations, to breathe through them, to observe them with curiosity rather than panic, can be deeply healing. When you can feel the racing heart and think, oh, there's my amygdala doing its thing, there's my sympathetic nervous system activating. When you can recognize the process for what it is, rather than interpreting it as catastrophe, the sensations become more manageable. They're still uncomfortable. They still demand attention, but they're no longer terrifying. They're just sensations, just the body doing what bodies do when the alarm is triggered. And slowly, with practice, you can learn to send signals of safety back to the body. Through breath, through gentle movement, through softening the muscles that have tensed in preparation for fight or flight. The vagus nerve, which runs from the brainstem down through the chest and into the abdomen, plays a crucial role in this process. It's the main pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system that counterbalances the fight or flight response. And you can activate the vagus nerve intentionally, through slow, deep breathing, especially breathing that emphasizes long, slow exhales. Through humming or singing or gargling, through gentle pressure on the chest or abdomen, through cold water on the face, through movement that's rhythmic and soothing rather than intense and activating. These aren't just relaxation techniques in some vague, feel-good sense. They're physiological interventions that directly affect the nervous system, that send real, measurable signals to the brain that it's safe to stand down, that the emergency has passed, that the body can return to a state of rest. And the more you practice these techniques, the stronger the pathways become. The brain learns that it has options, that it's not helpless in the face of fear, that there are things you can do to help yourself feel safer and calmer. But there's something else important to understand about fear and the body. Fear doesn't always announce itself clearly. Sometimes it shows up as irritability, as difficulty concentrating, as trouble sleeping, as physical tension or pain, as digestive problems, as fatigue. The sympathetic nervous system, when activated chronically, affects every system in the body. It diverts resources away from repair and maintenance, away from digestion and immune function, toward immediate survival. And over time, this takes a toll. This is why chronic stress and anxiety are linked to so many health problems. Not because stress itself is a disease, but because the body cannot sustain a state of high alert indefinitely without consequences. The system that evolved to handle acute, short-term threats, the kind of threats our ancestors faced occasionally and then resolved through action, is not designed for the ongoing, unresolvable stresses of modern life. The brain hasn't evolved to handle constant worry about money, about work performance, about global problems that are real but largely outside of individual control. And so the body suffers. The mind suffers. The capacity for joy and connection and presence diminishes. Not because you're weak, not because you're not trying hard enough, but because you're a human being with a nervous system that has limits, that needs periods of rest and recovery, that cannot function optimally when the alarm is always ringing. This is why safety, real or perceived, is so crucial for well-being. Not just physical safety, though that's certainly important, but psychological safety. The sense that you're okay, that you're accepted, that you have some measure of control over your life, that you're connected to others who care about you. These aren't luxuries, they're necessities. They're what the nervous system needs in order to regulate, in order to come out of defensive mode and return to a state where growth and healing and creativity are possible. And this is where fear connects to attachment, to relationships, to the profound human need for connection. Because we're not meant to face fear alone. Throughout our evolutionary history, safety was found in groups, in tribes, in families. A solitary human was a vulnerable human. But a human embedded in a supportive network, a human who could rely on others for help and comfort and protection, that human had a much better chance of survival. This is why social support is such a powerful buffer against stress and anxiety. Why having even one person who genuinely cares about you, who you can turn to when you're afraid or struggling, makes such a tremendous difference. The brain registers connection as safety. The presence of a trusted other literally changes the neurobiological response to threat. The same situation that might trigger intense anxiety when you're alone can feel much more manageable when someone is beside you, when you know you're not facing it by yourself. And conversely, isolation amplifies fear. When you're alone with your worried thoughts, with no one to talk to, no one to reality check your catastrophic predictions, the fear can grow unchecked. The mind spins in circles, looping through the same anxious thoughts over and over, with nothing to interrupt the pattern. This is why loneliness is so corrosive to mental health, why social isolation is such a strong risk factor for anxiety and depression. We need each other. Not just for practical support, though that matters, but for the felt sense of connection, for the regulation that happens when nervous systems interact, when presence meets presence. There's a concept in psychology called co-regulation. It's the process by which one person's calm nervous system helps to calm another person's activated nervous system. You see this most clearly with parents and infants. When a baby is distressed, crying, overwhelmed, the parent's calm presence, their soothing voice, their gentle touch, helps the baby's nervous system settle. This isn't just emotional comfort, though it is that. It's physiological. The parent's regulated state literally helps regulate the child's state. The rhythms sync. The stress hormones decrease. The baby learns, through repeated experience, that distress is temporary, that safety returns, that they're not alone in their fear. And this process doesn't stop in childhood. Throughout life, we continue to co-regulate with the people around us. A friend's steady presence when you're anxious, a partner's reassurance when you're worried, a therapist's calm attunement when you're processing something difficult. These interactions do something real in the nervous system. They provide evidence that you're safe, that you're supported, that you don't have to carry your fear alone. And over time, you internalize this. You develop the capacity to regulate yourself more effectively because you've experienced being regulated by others. But what happens when that support isn't available? When you grew up in an environment where fear was met with dismissal or punishment or more fear, when the people who were supposed to help you feel safe were themselves sources of threat. This is the origin of so much suffering, so much anxiety that seems disproportionate or inexplicable. Because the brain learned early that the world isn't safe, that people can't be trusted, that fear means you're on your own. And those early lessons, laid down when the brain was most plastic and impressionable, become templates for how you navigate relationships and challenges for the rest of your life. This is where the story of fear becomes closely intertwined with the story of healing. Because if fear can be learned, if the brain can be shaped by experience to sense danger even in moments that might be safe, then it can also be reshaped. Not erased completely, not rewritten from the beginning, but gently adjusted, updated with new experiences, taught through patient repetition that the patterns which once kept you safe may no longer be necessary. That the world you live in now is not the same world that first taught you to be afraid. This process is often described as neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and adapt across a lifetime. And while it is true that the brain is most flexible in childhood, most open to forming new patterns and new ways of responding, plasticity never fully disappears. The adult brain can still create new connections. It can still strengthen some pathways and allow others to fade. It simply takes more repetition, more consistency, more patience. The grooves formed over years, or even decades, of fearful thinking run deep. They do not disappear overnight. But they can soften. New pathways can begin to form beside them. And slowly, gradually, the brain can learn to rest in these newer, healthier patterns. This is the quiet hope at the heart of therapy, of mindfulness, of every intentional attempt to relate differently to your own fear. The goal is not to become fearless. That is neither realistic nor desirable. Fear has a purpose. It always has. But you can learn to tell the difference between fear that is protecting you from real danger and fear that is echoing old experiences, old lessons, old environments that no longer reflect your life today. You can begin to ask, is this fear helping me understand the present moment, or is it a shadow carried forward from the past? And sometimes the answer is complicated. Sometimes it is both. There may be a real challenge in front of you, something genuinely uncertain or difficult, and your reaction to it is amplified by memory, by the weight of earlier moments when things went wrong, when you felt powerless or alone. This is part of being human. We are never responding only to what is happening right now. We carry our whole history with us, layers of memory, emotion, and learned expectation, and they color every experience. Understand fear. You also have to understand your own story, the path that led you here. What were you taught about fear when you were a child? Was it acceptable to feel afraid, to ask for reassurance, to seek comfort? Or did you learn to hide your fear, to stay strong on the outside, even when you were trembling inside? Families, cultures, communities, all pass down different attitudes toward fear, and those lessons stay with us. They shape not only how we react to fear, but how we feel about the fact that we are afraid, whether we treat it with acceptance or judgment. In some environments, fear is treated as a weakness, something to overcome through toughness and willpower. And while courage has value, while facing what frightens you can be meaningful, this framing carries a hidden cost. Because when fear is seen as weakness, a second layer of suffering forms around it. Now you are afraid and ashamed of being afraid. You turn inward against yourself, trying to suppress. What you feel, trying to silence it. And that inner conflict only grows stronger. The fear does not disappear, it simply goes underground. And from there, it spreads more quietly, more deeply, coloring experience even as you try to act as though it is not there. Other traditions, other approaches, treat fear with more compassion. They recognize it as a natural response, as information from the nervous system that deserves attention and respect. This doesn't mean indulging every fear, letting anxiety dictate your choices, avoiding everything that makes you uncomfortable. But it means starting from a place of acceptance rather than judgment, acknowledging that you're afraid, without making it mean something about your worth or your capability. Fear is something you feel, not something you are. This distinction matters more than it might seem. Because when you identify with your fear, when you think of yourself as an anxious person, as someone who can't handle stress, as fundamentally damaged or broken, you're creating a story about yourself that becomes self-fulfilling. You look for evidence that confirms this identity. You interpret your experiences through this lens, and you may unconsciously resist change because change would threaten your sense of who you are. But when you can separate yourself from the fear, when you can observe it as a phenomenon that arises and passes, as a visitor rather than the core of your being, everything shifts. You have more room to move, more freedom to respond differently. The language we use shapes perception. Saying, "I am anxious," feels different from saying, "I feel anxious." The first makes anxiety a defining characteristic. The second acknowledges a temporary state. And while this might sound like a subtle semantic distinction, it has real psychological effects. It changes how the brain processes the experience. It creates space between the observer and the observed, between the you who is aware and the sensations and thoughts you're aware of. And in that space, choice becomes possible. This is part of why meditation and mindfulness practices can be so helpful for working with fear. Not because they make the fear disappear, but because they strengthen this capacity for observation, for witnessing your own experience without being consumed by it. When you sit quietly and watch your thoughts arise and pass, when you notice sensations in the body without immediately reacting to them, you're training a fundamental skill, the skill of presence, of being with what is without needing to fix it or change it or make it go away. And paradoxically, this acceptance often leads to change. When you stop fighting against your fear, when you stop adding resistance on top of the original discomfort, the fear often softens. Not always, not immediately. But over time, with practice, the relationship shifts. The fear becomes less threatening because you're no longer threatened by the fear itself. You know you can survive it. You've done it before, you can do it again. This doesn't mean the fear feels good. It doesn't mean you welcome it or want more of it. But it does mean you stop organizing your entire life around avoiding it. You stop making decisions based primarily on what will keep you comfortable in the short term, even when those decisions undermine your long-term well-being or keep you from things you value. You develop the capacity to do hard things, to be uncomfortable, to feel afraid and move forward anyway. Not recklessly. Not by ignoring genuine danger or pushing yourself beyond your limits, but by expanding those limits gradually, by proving to yourself through experience that you're more resilient than your fear would have you believe. There's a concept in psychology called the window of tolerance. It refers to the zone of arousal where you can function effectively, where you're alert but not overwhelmed, engaged but not shut down. When something pushes you outside this window, when stress elevates your arousal too high or drops it too low, Your capacity for complex thinking and emotional regulation decreases. You're either in fight or flight, reactive and defensive, or you're in freeze or collapse, numb and disconnected. Everyone's window of tolerance is different, and it's not fixed. It can be widened through practice, through repeated experiences of facing challenges and discovering you can handle them. It can also be narrowed by trauma, by chronic stress, by experiences that overwhelm your capacity to cope. Understanding your own window, knowing what tends to push you outside it, and learning techniques to bring yourself back into it, these are fundamental life skills. They're tools for navigating the inevitable difficulties and uncertainties of existence. And this is where we return to the body, to the physical practices that help regulate the nervous system. Because you can't think your way out of a physiological state. When the body is activated, when the alarm is ringing, rational thought has limited power. You need to work with the body directly, through breath, through movement, through touch, through sound, through any practice that sends safety signals to the brainstem, to the parts of the nervous system that operate below conscious control. Breathing is perhaps the most accessible of these practices. You always have your breath with you. And the breath is unique in that it's both automatic and voluntary. You breathe without thinking about it, thousands of times each day. But you can also consciously control your breathing. And this gives you direct access to the autonomic nervous system. When you breathe quickly and shallowly from the chest, you signal arousal, activation, preparation for action. When you breathe slowly and deeply from the belly, emphasizing the exhale, you signal safety, rest, recovery. The body listens to the breath. If you're breathing like you're in danger, the body assumes you're in danger and maintains its defensive stance. But if you breathe like you're safe, even when you feel afraid, the body begins to believe you. The heart rate slows. The blood pressure drops. The muscles relax. The mind clears. This isn't instant. It's not a magic switch. But it's a real, measurable intervention. 5 minutes of slow, deep breathing can significantly shift your physiological state. And the more you practice, the more readily your body responds. Movement works similarly. When the sympathetic nervous system activates, it floods the body with energy meant for action. If you take that action, if you run or fight or engage physically with the challenge, the energy gets used. The stress hormones metabolize. The body completes the cycle and can return to baseline. But if the energy stays trapped, if you sit still with it or try to suppress it, it lingers. This is part of why exercise is so effective for managing anxiety. It gives the mobilized energy somewhere to go. But not all movement is equally helpful. Intense, aggressive exercise can sometimes amplify activation rather than discharge it. What often works better is rhythmic, repetitive movement. Walking, swimming, cycling, dancing. Movement that has a steady, predictable pattern that the body can settle into. Movement that's purposeful but not urgent, that allows you to stay present rather than pushing you into overdrive. This kind of movement is soothing. It organizes the nervous system. It creates coherence between intention and action, between mind and body. Touch is another powerful regulator, though it's often overlooked. When you place a hand on your own chest or belly, when you give yourself a gentle hug, when you massage your own hands or temples, you're activating the vagus nerve and sending calming signals to the brain. This is self-soothing in its most literal sense. You're using touch to regulate your own nervous system. And while touch from another person, from someone you trust, can be even more powerful, self-touch is always available. It's a portable source of comfort, a way to offer yourself the kind of care you might wish for from others. Sound also affects the nervous system directly. The vagus nerve connects to the muscles of the middle ear, and certain sounds can activate it. Humming, chanting, singing, even gargling. These create vibrations that travel through the body and signal safety to the brainstem. This is part of why singing or humming can feel so soothing, why lullabies calm babies, why chanting is central to many spiritual practices. The sound itself, the vibration of it, has physiological effects that go beyond the meaning of the words. And then there's the environment, the external context that shapes your felt sense of safety. Lighting, temperature, sound levels, the presence or absence of other people, the familiarity of the space. All of these factors influence the nervous system's background assessment of safety versus threat. This is why you might feel fine in one environment and anxious in another, even when there's no obvious danger in either place. The body is constantly reading environmental cues, most of them below conscious awareness, and adjusting its defensive stance accordingly. Creating environments that support regulation, that help your nervous system feel safe, is an often overlooked aspect of managing fear and anxiety. This might mean having a space in your home that feels particularly safe and comfortable, a place you can retreat to when you're overwhelmed. It might mean paying attention to sensory input, to what sounds or sights or smells help you feel calm versus what amplifies your stress. It might mean being thoughtful about your exposure to news and social media, to the constant stream of information about threats and dangers and problems you can't solve. Because the modern information environment is, in many ways, hostile to nervous system regulation. We evolved to be aware of threats in our immediate physical environment, in the tribe or village or hunting ground we actually inhabited. We didn't evolve to carry in our pockets a device that delivers a constant feed of every terrible thing happening anywhere in the world. The brain treats information about distant threats similarly to how it treats nearby threats. It activates the same alarm systems, and this can leave you in a state of chronic, low-grade activation, always aware of danger, always on guard, even though none of the threats you're learning about are things you can actually do anything about. This is not to say you should be uninformed or disconnected from the world, but it does suggest the importance of being intentional about what you consume, when, and how much. The brain needs periods of rest, of safety, of freedom from threat monitoring. It needs time to repair and restore and integrate, and it can't do that if you're constantly feeding it reasons to stay vigilant, to stay afraid, to maintain the defensive stance. Quiet is healing. Stillness is healing. Simplicity is healing. These aren't escapes from reality. They're necessary conditions for the nervous system to recalibrate, to return to baseline, to remember that not everything is urgent, that not every moment requires vigilance. In the gaps between stimulation, in the spaces where nothing is demanding your attention, the body can exhale, the mind can settle, the sense of pressure can release. And this brings us to sleep, to the profound relationship between fear and rest. Because fear and sleep have a complicated interaction. When you're afraid, sleep becomes difficult. The activated nervous system resists the surrender that sleep requires. The mind stays alert, scanning for threats, running through scenarios, unable to let go. And lack of sleep, in turn, amplifies fear. When you're exhausted, your window of tolerance narrows. Your capacity for emotional regulation decreases. Small stresses feel overwhelming. Ambiguous situations seem threatening. The world becomes a more frightening place simply because you're too tired to cope effectively. This can create a vicious cycle. Fear disrupts sleep. Poor sleep amplifies fear. And around it goes, each feeding the other, until you're caught in a pattern that feels impossible to break. But it can be broken. It requires patience and consistency, a willingness to work with the body's natural rhythms rather than against them. Creating a bedtime routine that signals safety. Keeping the sleeping environment cool, dark, quiet. Avoiding screens and stimulating content before bed. Using breathing or progressive relaxation to help the body transition from wakefulness to sleep. And perhaps most importantly, changing your relationship with sleeplessness itself. Because often, the anxiety about not sleeping becomes worse than the actual lack of sleep. You lie awake, worried about how tired you'll be tomorrow, how poorly you'll function, how this confirms that something is wrong with you. And that worry keeps you awake longer. But if you can lie there without fighting it, without adding fear on top of wakefulness, just resting, even if you're not sleeping, the body still gets some recovery. And often, when you stop trying so hard to sleep, when you give up the struggle, sleep comes more easily. There's something deeply counterintuitive about this approach to fear, about this idea of accepting rather than fighting, of making space rather than trying to eliminate. Everything in us wants to push discomfort away, to fix what hurts, to solve the problem of fear as quickly as possible. And there's nothing wrong with this impulse. It's natural, it's human. It's the same protective mechanism at work, trying to restore a sense of safety and control. But sometimes, the very effort to escape fear keeps us trapped in it. This is the paradox at the heart of anxiety. The more you try to control your fear, the more power it seems to have. The more you avoid situations that make you anxious, the more your world shrinks. The more you fight against worried thoughts, the more persistent they become. It's like struggling in quicksand. The harder you fight, the deeper you sink. But if you can relax, if you can let yourself be held by the discomfort without thrashing against it, you discover that it's actually possible to float. This doesn't mean you become passive or resigned. It doesn't mean you stop taking care of yourself or addressing real problems in your life. It means you stop adding suffering on top of suffering. You stop making the fear itself into an emergency that must be solved immediately. You learn to tolerate distress, to coexist with uncertainty, to be uncomfortable without treating discomfort as catastrophe. And this tolerance, this capacity to hold difficulty without being overwhelmed by it, this is resilience. Resilience is often misunderstood. It's thought of as toughness, as the ability to bounce back quickly, to not be affected by hardship. But that's not quite right. Resilience isn't about being unaffected. It's about being affected and continuing anyway. It's about feeling the full weight of fear or grief or disappointment and not being destroyed by it. It's about bending without breaking. About knowing that you can survive difficulty because you already have, many times, even when it didn't feel like you would. And this knowledge, this embodied sense of your own resilience, it builds gradually through experience. Each time you face something that frightens you and come through it intact, you're adding evidence to a database in your mind, the database that tells you whether you can handle hard things, whether you're capable, whether you're safe in your own skin. And over time, with enough experiences of facing challenges and surviving them, the balance shifts. The evidence for your resilience outweighs the evidence for your fragility. The brain learns to trust your capacity to cope. But this process requires actually having those experiences. It requires exposure, practice, a willingness to approach rather than avoid. And this is hard. Because avoidance feels safe in the moment. If you don't go to the party, you won't feel socially anxious. If you don't try for the promotion, you won't risk rejection. If you don't open up emotionally, you won't get hurt. The logic seems sound, but what it misses is the long-term cost. Every time you avoid something because it makes you afraid, you're teaching your brain that the fear was justified, that you weren't capable of handling it, that avoidance was necessary for your survival. And the brain learns this lesson very efficiently. It generalizes from it. The boundaries of your comfort zone contract. More and more situations start to feel dangerous, start to trigger the same avoidance response. Until you're living a life that feels safe, but also small, constrained, limited by invisible walls made of fear. You're protected, yes, but you're also imprisoned. And at some point, the protection stops being worth the cost. This is when people often seek help. Not when the fear is at its worst, necessarily, but when the life they're living to avoid the fear becomes unbearable. When they realize they're missing out on things that matter. When the gap between the life they're living and the life they want to live becomes too wide to ignore. And this realization, painful as it is actually the beginning of change. Because it means you found something you value more than comfort. Something worth being uncomfortable for. Values are like a compass that can guide you through fear. When you know what matters to you, what you want to stand for, what kind of person you want to be, and what kind of life you want to build, you have a reference point for making choices. Not choices that feel easy or comfortable, but choices that feel meaningful. Choices that move you in the direction of the life you actually want, rather than the life that fear would have you settle for. This is different from goals. Goals are destinations. Values are directions. You can achieve a goal and then wonder what's next, feel empty or lost once the external marker of success is reached. But values are ongoing. They're about how you walk through the world, how you treat yourself and others, what you prioritize and pay attention to. And they don't require you to be fearless. They just require you to keep choosing the direction that matters to you, even when you're afraid, especially when you're afraid. Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in accordance with your values, despite the fear. It's the willingness to be uncomfortable in service of something that matters. And this kind of courage is available to everyone. You don't have to be naturally brave. You don't have to wait until the fear goes away. You just have to know what you care about and take one small step in that direction, and then another, and then another, until you look back and realize how far you've come. But values alone aren't enough. You also need skills. You need to know how to regulate your nervous system, how to work with difficult emotions, how to question unhelpful thoughts, how to communicate effectively, how to set boundaries, how to ask for help. These are learnable skills. They're not innate gifts that some people have and others don't. They're capacities that can be developed through practice and instruction and feedback. This is important because so many people believe their anxiety is just who they are, a fundamental flaw in their wiring that they'll have to live with forever. And while it's true that some people are temperamentally more sensitive, more reactive, more prone to anxiety than others, it's also true that everyone can learn to work with their nervous system more skillfully. Everyone can expand their capacity to tolerate distress, to challenge catastrophic thinking, to soothe themselves when they're activated. The starting point may be different, but growth is possible for everyone. Therapy, when it's effective, is largely about teaching these skills, about creating a safe relationship within which you can explore your patterns, test new behaviors, learn different ways of relating to yourself and others. Therapist doesn't have magic answers or secret knowledge. What they have is training in how to help people change, and a commitment to being present with you in your struggle without being overwhelmed by it. They model regulation. They reflect back what they see in you. They challenge beliefs that no longer serve you. They celebrate your progress and hold steady through your setbacks. But therapy is just one path. There are many ways to develop these skills, many contexts in which healing and growth can happen. Supportive friendships, spiritual communities, creative practices, physical disciplines like yoga or martial arts, reading and learning, time in nature, any context where you feel safe enough to be vulnerable, where you can practice new ways of being, where you receive feedback that helps you calibrate your responses. These can be contexts for change. Nature, in particular, has a special capacity to settle the nervous system. There's something about being in the presence of living things that grow and change at their own pace, according to their own rhythms, that puts human concerns in perspective. Trees don't worry about the future. Birds don't ruminate about the past. Water flows where it can flow and doesn't struggle against the shape of its container. And being around these forms of life, these expressions of existence that don't share our particular human anxieties, can be deeply settling. Research supports this. Time in natural environments reduces cortisol levels, lowers blood pressure, improves mood, enhances attention. Even looking at images of nature, even having plants in your living space, has measurable effects. It's as if the nervous system recognizes nature as home, as the environment it evolved in, and relaxes in its presence. The constant stimulation and demands of modern built environments, the screens and schedules and social pressures, these keep the system activated. But nature asks nothing. It simply is. And in its presence, you can simply be as well. This being rather than doing, this presence rather than constant striving, it's deeply countercultural. The modern world rewards productivity, efficiency, optimization. It tells you that you're only as valuable as what you produce, that rest is laziness, that there's always more to do and achieve and improve. And this relentless pressure, this sense that you're never quite enough as you are, it's a breeding ground for anxiety, because you can never fully rest, you can never fully arrive. There's always another goal, another standard, another way you're falling short. But what if your worth isn't contingent on your productivity? What if you're valuable simply by virtue of being alive, of being a conscious entity in a vast and mysterious universe? What if there's nothing you need to prove or achieve or fix about yourself? This is a radical proposition in an achievement-oriented culture. But it's also potentially liberating. Because if you're already enough, if your existence itself has inherent worth, then you can stop running. You can stop trying to earn your right to be here. You can relax into being. This doesn't mean you become complacent or unmotivated. It means your motivation comes from a different place. Not from fear of inadequacy, not from trying to prove your worth, but from genuine interest and care. From wanting to contribute, to create, to connect, to grow. From valuing the process rather than just the outcome. From choosing challenge because it's meaningful, not because you have to in order to feel okay about yourself. And when your actions come from this place, from wholeness rather than scarcity, from presence rather than fear, something subtle begins to shift. You become more creative because you are no longer afraid of making mistakes. You become more genuine because you're not performing for approval. You feel more connected because you're not constantly guarding yourself against vulnerability. And you feel more at peace because you're no longer in conflict with your own inner world. The fear doesn't vanish, but it is no longer steering the direction of your life. It becomes a passenger, a messenger, one voice among many, instead of the only voice you can hear. Learning to hear those other voices, to connect with the parts of yourself that exist beyond fear, is essential. Because when anxiety rises, it can feel as though it consumes your entire identity, as if you have shrunk down into nothing but worry. But you are larger than that. You contain many different facets. Yes, there is the part of you that is afraid, but there is also the part that is curious, the part that is kind, the part that loves beauty, the part that knows how to play, the part that cares deeply for others, and the part that has endured everything life has placed in your path so far. Internal family systems therapy describes this idea clearly: the understanding that we are not a single, unified self, but a constellation of parts, each with its own viewpoint and protective role. The anxious part tries to keep you safe by anticipating danger. The perfectionistic part tries to keep you safe by preventing criticism. The people-pleasing part tries to keep you safe by maintaining harmony. None of these parts are bad. They are all trying to help. But sometimes they are working with old information, trying to solve problems that no longer exist, guarding you against threats that are no longer here. The work is to build a relationship with these parts, to thank them for their effort, to ask what they fear might happen if they stopped their protective behaviors, to reassure them that you, the core self, the aware and steady presence that can observe all of these parts, are capable of handling things now. You have resources you did not have when these patterns first formed. You can choose differently. And, over time, with patient reassurance, these parts begin to relax. They no longer have to work so hard. They begin to trust that you can carry the load. This inner conversation, this gentle, compassionate way of relating to your own fear and protection systems, may sound unusual at first, especially if it's unfamiliar, but it can be deeply effective. Because the parts of you that create anxiety are not trying to harm you. They are trying to protect you in the only way they know. And when you fight them, judge them, or try to push them away, they intensify. They work harder. They assume that you are missing the danger, that you're not taking the threat seriously enough. But when you listen to them with patience and care, when you acknowledge their intentions and their efforts to keep you safe, they soften. They become open to new possibilities. This is self-compassion in practice. Not indulgence, not self-pity, but a sincere kindness toward your own pain. Treating yourself with the same warmth you would offer a close friend who is struggling. Recognizing that being human is difficult, that everyone suffers at times, and that your fear and sorrow are part of a shared human experience, not proof that you are uniquely flawed or inadequate. Research on self-compassion shows strong links to psychological well-being, even stronger than those associated with self-esteem. Self-esteem is often conditional, tied to achievement or comparison, easily shaken by failure or criticism. Self-compassion is different. It is not dependent on success or superiority. It doesn't require you to be exceptional. It only requires that you are human, that you struggle, that you feel, that you are in need of care. And those conditions are always present. Whatever else may be true, you always qualify for your own compassion. But offering yourself compassion when you're afraid, when you're anxious, when you feel like you're failing or falling apart, this can be surprisingly difficult. Because often there's a belief, usually unconscious, that if you're kind to yourself, you'll become weak or complacent. That you need the inner critic, the harsh voice that pushes and judges and demands more in order to stay motivated. That compassion is soft, indulgent, something you can only afford once you've earned it through achievement or improvement. This belief is understandable. Many of us learned it early. We learned that love and approval were conditional, that they had to be earned through performance or good behavior. We learned that mistakes were shameful, that struggle meant weakness, that we had to be strong and capable and independent to deserve care. And so we internalized a harsh voice, a critic that does to us from the inside what we feared others would do from the outside. We beat ourselves up before anyone else can. We stay vigilant against our own flaws and failures. We never quite let ourselves rest. But this approach, while understandable, is exhausting, and ultimately, it doesn't work the way we hope it will. The inner critic doesn't actually make you more successful or capable. It makes you more afraid, more defensive, more likely to avoid challenges because the cost of failure feels too high, more likely to burn out because you're running on fear and shame rather than genuine motivation. The harsh voice may get you moving in the short term, but in the long term, it erodes your resilience, your creativity, your sense of self-worth. Compassion, by contrast, creates safety. And from a place of safety, growth becomes possible. When you know you'll be kind to yourself regardless of the outcome, you become more willing to take risks, to try new things, to tolerate the discomfort of learning and growing. When you can acknowledge mistakes without drowning in shame, you can learn from them. When you can hold your own pain without judgment, it becomes bearable, workable, something you can be with rather than something you have to escape. This is not the same as making excuses or avoiding responsibility. Compassion doesn't mean telling yourself that nothing is your fault, that you never need to change, that everyone else is the problem. It means acknowledging the reality of your experience, including the ways you've contributed to your own difficulties, while still maintaining a basic stance of kindness toward yourself. It means separating your worth as a person from your behaviors or circumstances. It means recognizing that you're doing the best you can with the resources and understanding you have right now, even when your best isn't perfect, even when it's not enough, even when you wish you could do better. And from this foundation of self-compassion, real change becomes more possible. Because you're not changing in order to finally be acceptable, you're already acceptable. You're changing because you care about yourself, because you want to suffer less, because you value growth and learning and becoming more of who you're capable of being. The motivation is different. It comes from love rather than fear. And changes that come from love tend to be more sustainable, more authentic, more aligned with who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. This brings us back to fear, but from a different angle. Because one of the deepest fears, perhaps the deepest fear, is the fear of our own unacceptability. The fear that if people really knew us, really saw us, they would reject us. That there's something fundamentally wrong or broken or unlovable at our core. And this fear drives so much of our behavior. The masks we wear, the ways we perform or hide or try to control how others see us. The constant monitoring and adjusting and attempting to be acceptable enough to deserve belonging. But what if this fear is based on a misunderstanding? What if there's nothing at your core that's unacceptable? What if the flaws and struggles and shadow parts you work so hard to hide are not evidence of your unworthiness, but simply evidence of your humanity? What if everyone feels this way, at least sometimes? This sense of not quite measuring up, of being secretly inadequate behind whatever front they present to the world. There's a concept in psychology called the spotlight effect. It's the tendency to overestimate how much others are noticing and judging us. We feel like we're constantly in the spotlight, like every mistake or awkward moment or physical flaw is glaringly obvious to everyone around us. But research shows that people are generally far less focused on us than we imagine. They're mostly thinking about themselves, worrying about their own performance, monitoring their own flaws. The spotlight we feel is largely internal. We're the ones shining it on ourselves, judging ourselves harshly, and then projecting that judgment onto others. Understanding this can be freeing, because it means that much of the social fear we carry, much of the anxiety about being seen or judged or rejected, is based on an inaccurate perception. People aren't scrutinizing you nearly as much as you think they are. They're not cataloging your mistakes or flaws. They're not replaying your awkward comments or analyzing your appearance. They're mostly just moving through their own lives, dealing with their own concerns, too preoccupied with themselves to be constantly evaluating you. And even when people do judge you, even when they form negative opinions or reject you in some way, their judgment says more about them than it does about you. About their own values, their own fears, their own need to feel superior or safe by putting others down. You don't have to carry other people's judgments as truth. You don't have to let someone else's limited perspective define your worth. You can acknowledge that they see you a certain way, that they have their opinion, and simultaneously know that their opinion is just one perspective among many, including your own. This is sovereignty. This is the capacity to hold your own sense of self-steady, even in the face of external judgment or rejection. It doesn't mean you don't care what others think. Caring about how we're perceived is natural and human, and not something to be transcended. But it means you don't collapse into other people's opinions. You don't make them more important than your own direct experience of yourself. You can hold both truths: that someone sees you a certain way, and that you know yourself to be more complex, more nuanced, more than any single perspective can capture. And this inner steadiness, this sense of self that isn't entirely dependent on external validation, it's protective against fear. Because so much social anxiety comes from the belief that rejection would be catastrophic, that disapproval would prove something terrible about you, that you need everyone to like you in order to be okay. But when you have a stable core, when you know yourself and accept yourself with some degree of compassion, other people's opinions become less threatening. They still matter, they still affect you, but they don't determine you. They don't have the power to shatter your sense of self. Building this inner stability is slow and gradual work. It grows through small moments, moments when you choose to trust your own experience instead of someone else's judgment. Moments when you catch yourself slipping into shame and gently remind yourself of your inherent worth. It grows through surrounding yourself, whenever possible, with people who see you clearly and care for you as you are. People whose presence supports, rather than erodes, your sense of self. And it grows through creative expression, through anything that helps you articulate your inner world, instead of simply reflecting what you think others want to see. Art, writing, music, movement. Any form of creative practice can be deeply healing for anxiety, because it allows you to express what lives inside you without needing to justify or explain it. It bypasses the rational mind, the part that critiques, edits, and tries to make everything acceptable. It allows you to be uncertain, imperfect, unresolved. It gives shape to feelings that don't yet have words. And in doing so, it validates your experience. It says, "This is real. What you feel matters. It deserves space. It deserves to exist." And when you create something, when you bring into the world something that wasn't there before, you also remind yourself that you are capable, that you have agency, that you are not merely a passive observer of life, but an active participant in it. This is agency, the opposite of helplessness. And helplessness often sits at the core of anxiety, the sense that you cannot influence outcomes, that you are at the mercy of events beyond your control, that all you can do is worry and brace yourself. But you are not helpless. Even in situations where your choices are limited, where you truly cannot change what happens, you still have agency in how you respond, in the meaning you give to events, in how you treat yourself during difficult moments, in whether you reach out for support or carry everything alone, in whether you meet the experience with curiosity or close down in fear. These choices matter. They may not solve every problem, but they shape your experience of the problem. They help determine whether hardship becomes traumatic or becomes something you grow through. This is the insight Viktor Frankl wrote about during his time in the concentration camps, in circumstances as extreme as human experience allows. That even when everything external is taken from you, when you have no control over your environment, you still retain the freedom to choose your attitude, your inner response. And that this freedom, this last human freedom, is something that cannot be taken away. It is always present. Even in the darkest moments, that choice remains. And within that choice, your power lives. But using this power requires practice. It requires remembering, again and again, that you still have options, that you are not trapped, that even fear, even anxiety, even overwhelming distress, these are experiences you are moving through, not prisons you are locked inside. They rise, they shift, and eventually they fade. Nothing stays at peak intensity forever. Everything moves, everything flows, even when it feels painfully still. Recognizing this impermanence is one of the most helpful tools for working with fear. Because when anxiety takes hold, it feels endless, as though this state will last forever, as though this is your new permanent reality. But it never is. If you can remember this, if you can remind yourself that this too will pass, it creates a little space to breathe, a small distance from the immediacy of the feeling. Most experiences become bearable when you know they are temporary. It is the belief in permanence that makes suffering feel unbearable. But the mind does not automatically remember impermanence in moments of distress. It has to be trained. Through practice, through repeatedly noticing that intense feelings do subside, that difficult moments do end, that you have survived every hard day of your life so far, through building a living record of resilience that your mind can return to when fear insists that this time is different. Keeping some kind of record can help. A journal where you write about difficult moments and later return to note when they shifted, how you felt afterward. A list of hard things you have survived. Gentle reminders written to yourself. Truths you understand intellectually but forget emotionally when anxiety rises. These are not empty affirmations. They are evidence, real data points that counter the catastrophic predictions fear excels at. They help the thinking brain stay online when the emotional brain wants to take full control. And this balance, this collaboration between the emotional and rational parts of your mind, is what integration truly means. Not reason suppressing emotion, not emotion overwhelming reason, but a genuine partnership. Emotion offers information about what matters to you, about what feels safe or unsafe, about your values and needs. Reason offers perspective. It asks whether the emotion's interpretation is accurate and helps you choose responses that support your long-term well-being rather than just short-term relief. Neither system is meant to work alone. Emotion without reason can become overwhelming and impulsive. Reason without emotion becomes cold and disconnected, stripped of meaning. You need both, to feel and to think. to honor what your body and heart are telling you, while also engaging your capacity for reflection. This is maturity. This is wisdom. This is living as a whole, integrated person, rather than as a fragmented one. And living as a whole person means accepting all of yourself, including the parts that feel afraid, including the vulnerability that comes with being a creature who can be hurt, who will eventually die, who cannot control most of what happens in life. This acceptance is not defeat. It's not giving up or giving in. It's simply honesty. It's looking clearly at the conditions of existence and choosing to be here anyway, to participate fully, even knowing that participation involves risk and uncertainty and inevitable loss. There's a kind of courage in this acceptance that's different from the courage of pushing through fear or powering past obstacles. It's quieter, less dramatic, but perhaps more fundamental. It's the courage to be vulnerable, to love even though love makes you vulnerable, to care about outcomes you cannot control, to invest in things that may not work out, to show up authentically even when that means risking rejection or misunderstanding or failure. Brené Brown writes extensively about this kind of courage, about vulnerability as strength rather than weakness. And her research consistently shows that the people who live most wholeheartedly, who feel most satisfied and connected and engaged with their lives, are not the people who've eliminated vulnerability. They're the people who've learned to be vulnerable wisely, who understand that vulnerability is the birthplace of everything that makes life meaningful. Connection, creativity, joy, love, belonging. All of these require you to risk something, to put yourself out there without guarantees, to be willing to be seen and possibly rejected, to try and possibly fail. Fear will always try to talk you out of this risk. That's its job, to keep you safe, to protect you from potential harm. And sometimes its warnings are worth heeding. But sometimes, often, the things fear warns you away from are exactly the things that would make your life richer, deeper, more fully lived. The relationship you don't pursue because you might get hurt. The creative project you don't start because it might not be good enough. The opportunity you don't take because you might fail. The vulnerable conversation you don't have because you might be rejected. And each time you let fear make these decisions for you, you're trading potential pain for certain limitation. You're choosing the known safety of your current life over the unknown possibilities that exist beyond your comfort zone. And that's a valid choice. Sometimes it's even the right choice. But it should be a conscious choice, not an automatic one. It should be a decision you make deliberately, weighing what you'd gain against what you'd risk, rather than a reflexive contraction away from anything that activates your nervous system. This is where courage comes in again, not as the absence of fear, but as the willingness to act despite fear when something matters enough. When the potential meaning or growth or connection on the other side of the fear is worth the discomfort of moving through it. Courage is choosing values over comfort, choosing growth over safety, choosing presence over protection. And these choices accumulate over time. Each small act of courage makes the next one slightly easier. Each time you do something that frightens you and survive it, you're expanding your sense of what's possible, what you're capable of, who you can be. But you don't have to be courageous all the time. You don't have to constantly push yourself beyond your limits or say yes to every uncomfortable opportunity. Sometimes the courageous choice is rest. Sometimes it's setting boundaries. Sometimes it's saying, no, I cannot do this right now. I need to tend to myself. Courage includes the wisdom to know when to push and when to pull back, when to challenge yourself and when to be gentle, when your fear is protecting you from genuine harm, and when it's just protecting you from discomfort. This discernment develops through practice, trial and error, through paying attention to what happens when you listen to fear versus when you challenge it, through noticing patterns, through learning your own system well enough to recognize the difference between reasonable caution and anxiety spiraling into catastrophe, through building a relationship with your own intuition, that quiet knowing beneath the noise of worry that often has valuable information if you can learn to hear it. Intuition and anxiety can feel similar. Both create physical sensations. Both arise without conscious reasoning. But they have different qualities if you pay close attention. Anxiety tends to be loud, urgent, catastrophic in its predictions. It spirals and amplifies and creates worst-case scenarios. Intuition tends to be quieter, steadier, more neutral in its assessment. It doesn't insist or demand or try to frighten you into action. It simply offers information. A gentle yes or no, a subtle sense of rightness or wrongness about a particular path. Learning to distinguish between these voices takes time and attention. It requires slowing down enough to actually feel into your experience, rather than just reacting to the first strong emotion that arises. It requires asking questions. What exactly am I afraid of? Is this fear based on evidence or assumption? What's the actual risk versus the imagined catastrophe? What does my deeper knowing, beneath the worry, have to say about this situation? And then waiting, listening, being willing to sit with uncertainty long enough for clarity to emerge. This capacity for stillness, for pausing between stimulus and response, for creating space where conscious choice becomes possible. This is perhaps the most valuable skill you can develop for working with fear. Because so much of the suffering that fear creates comes from our immediate, automatic reactions to it. The way we believe every worried thought, the way we contract and defend and withdraw as soon as anxiety appears, the way we make fear mean something about us, rather than just observing it as a phenomenon that's occurring. But when you can pause, when you can create even a moment of space between the fear arising and your response to it, everything changes. You have options. You can breathe. You can notice what's happening without being swept away by it. You can engage the thinking brain, can bring in perspective and context and memory. You can choose how to respond rather than just reacting automatically. This is freedom. This is the space where your agency lives. And the more you practice creating this space, the more naturally it appears. The gap between stimulus and response widens. The pause becomes easier to access. You develop what's sometimes called the observing self, the part of you that can watch your experience without being consumed by it, that can notice, oh, I'm feeling anxious right now, without becoming the anxiety, that can observe thoughts arising without believing every thought is truth, that can witness sensations in the body without interpreting them as emergency. This observing self is always present, always available. It's the awareness beneath all experience, the consciousness that knows what you're thinking and feeling and sensing. The you that existed before this particular worry, that will exist after it passes, that is larger and more stable than any particular mental or emotional state. Connecting with this observing self is deeply calming, because from this vantage point, you can see that everything is temporary. Everything is just weather moving through the vast sky of awareness. Thoughts and feelings arise and pass like clouds. Some are dark and heavy, some are light and pleasant, but none of them are permanent. None of them are who you are. This is the insight at the heart of many contemplative traditions. The recognition that you are not your thoughts or your emotions or your fear. You are the awareness that knows them, the space in which they occur. And this space is inherently peaceful, inherently whole, inherently okay, regardless of what's arising within it. The content of your experience may be turbulent, but the container, the awareness itself, is always stable. And resting in this awareness, even for brief moments, provides a profound sense of relief, because nothing needs to be different. You don't have to fix or change or improve anything. You don't have to make the fear go away or become a different person or solve all your problems. You can just be. Just this. Just now. Just aware of what's happening without needing it to be other than it is. And in this acceptance, this allowing, there's a kind of peace that's independent of circumstances. A peace that doesn't require everything in your life to be going well. A peace that's available even in the midst of difficulty. This doesn't mean you stop caring about your life or working to improve things. It means you stop making your peace conditional on everything being perfect. You stop tying your okayness to outcomes you can't control. You learn to have preferences without being attached to them, to work toward goals without your worth depending on achieving them, to care deeply while also holding everything lightly. This is the balance that makes life workable, that allows you to be fully engaged without being destroyed when things don't go as hoped. And things often don't go as hoped. This is guaranteed. Loss is inevitable. Failure is unavoidable. Disappointment is part of being alive. The question is not whether you'll experience these things, but how you'll relate to them when they come. Whether you'll let them confirm your worst fears about yourself and the world, or whether you'll meet them with some measure of grace and self-compassion. Whether you'll collapse into despair, or whether you'll grieve what's lost, and then, eventually, when you're ready, turn toward what remains, toward what's still possible, toward the next thing. Resilience is this, turning toward. This willingness to begin again after falling apart, to get up after being knocked down, to try again after failing, to love again after loss, to hope again after disappointment. It's not about being invulnerable or unaffected. It's about being able to repair, to recover, to regenerate. Like the natural world that cycles through seasons of death and rebirth, that loses everything in winter and blooms again in spring. You too contain this capacity for renewal. It's built into you, into every cell of your body, which is constantly dying and being replaced, into your brain, which is constantly forming new connections, into your heart, which goes on beating through everything. You are more resilient than you know, stronger than your fear would have you believe, capable of more than your anxiety tells you. This isn't empty reassurance, it's fact. You have survived every difficult thing that's happened to you so far, every heartbreak, every failure, every moment when you thought you couldn't go on. You've survived it all. And that's evidence. Evidence that you can survive whatever comes next, that you have resources, that you know how to cope, that you're capable of enduring and adapting and finding your way through. This doesn't mean the next hard thing will be easy. It won't. But you don't need it to be easy. You just need to know you can get through it. That you've done hard things before. That difficulty is temporary. That you're not alone, even when you feel alone. That support is available if you reach for it. That this moment, this breath, this single next step is all you need to handle right now. Not tomorrow's worries, not next week's challenges, just this, just now. Just one breath, one moment, one small action at a time. And in this way, through this gentle, moment-by-moment approach, you can move through anything. You can live with uncertainty. You can tolerate discomfort. You can coexist with fear without being controlled by it. You can build a life that matters to you, that reflects your values, that contains meaning and connection, and moments of genuine joy, even while acknowledging that fear is part of the package, that vulnerability is the price of love, that uncertainty is the condition of being alive, that you cannot guarantee outcomes or protect yourself from all possible harm. But you can show up, you can be present, you can choose, again and again, to engage with life rather than withdraw from it, to open rather than close, to connect rather than isolate, to try rather than give up before you've begun. And these choices, small as they may seem in any single moment, these are how you build a life, how you become who you're capable of being, how you honor the gift of your own existence. Because existence is a gift, even with all its difficulty and uncertainty and fear, even with the pain and loss that are woven into its fabric. The fact that you are here, that you are conscious, that you can experience beauty and connection and meaning, this is extraordinary, improbable, precious. And fear, in its own complicated way, is a reminder of this. A reminder that your life matters enough to protect, that you have something worth preserving, that there is something in you that wants to continue, to persist, to remain present in this strange and overwhelming world. So perhaps the ultimate relationship with fear is not one of conquest or elimination, but one of gratitude. Not gratitude for the suffering that fear can cause, not gratitude for the ways it can limit and constrain, but gratitude for what it represents. For the brain that cares enough about your survival to stay vigilant. For the body that responds so quickly to potential danger. For the evolutionary inheritance that has kept your ancestors alive through countless generations of challenge and threat. For the signal system that, however imperfectly, however overactive it may sometimes be, is fundamentally on your side. Your fear is trying to love you. It may not feel like love. It may feel like torment, like punishment, like a cruel limitation on your freedom and happiness. But beneath all of that, at its core, fear is protective. It's care. It's the nervous system's way of saying, you matter, your well-being matters. I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. And while you may need to negotiate with this protective system to help it update its threat assessments and relax its vigilance, you don't need to be at war with it. You don't need to treat it as an enemy to be defeated. Instead, you can approach your own fear the way you might approach a frightened child. With patience, with kindness, with reassurance. You can acknowledge its concerns while also gently offering a broader perspective. Yes, I understand you're worried about this. Thank you for trying to protect me. And also, I want you to know that we're okay right now. We have more resources than we used to. We can handle more than you think. We don't need to be quite so afraid. This internal dialogue, this relationship with your own fear, it softens over time. The fear begins to trust you, to believe that you're paying attention, that you won't lead yourself into unnecessary danger, that you can be counted on to take care. And as it trusts, it relaxes. It doesn't need to scream quite so loudly to get your attention. It doesn't need to manufacture catastrophes to make sure you're being careful. It can become a quieter voice, a gentle advisor rather than a tyrannical dictator. But this trust is built gradually, through consistency, through proving to your nervous system again and again that you're capable, that you're aware, that you're taking care. Through honoring your limits while also gently expanding them. Through rest when you need rest, and challenge when you're ready for challenge. Through listening to what your body and emotions are telling you, while also engaging your wisdom and your values in making choices. Through being the kind, steady, reliable presence for yourself that perhaps you didn't always have from others. This is reparenting yourself, meeting your own needs with the care and attention they deserve, and it's never too late for this. No matter how long you've been struggling, no matter how entrenched your patterns of fear and anxiety, change is possible. Growth is possible. Healing is possible. Because you're alive, and life is movement, and movement means the potential for change. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is final. Every moment offers a fresh start, a new choice, another opportunity to respond differently. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be with yourself in your fear. Not trying to fix it, or change it, or make it go away, just being present. Just sitting with the discomfort, the way you might sit with a friend who's going through something difficult. You wouldn't try to talk them out of their feelings or rush them through their process. You would just be there, steady, present, offering the gift of your attention and your acceptance. You can offer this same gift to yourself. In those moments when fear feels overwhelming, when anxiety seems unbearable, when you don't know what to do or how to cope, sometimes the answer is nothing. Sometimes the answer is just to breathe, to feel your feet on the ground, to notice what's around you, to bring your awareness to this present moment rather than the frightening future your mind is projecting. To remember that right now, in this actual moment, you're okay. The breath is flowing, the heart is beating, life is happening, and that's enough. This coming back to the present, this anchoring in what's actually happening rather than what might happen, this is the foundation of every mindfulness practice. Because fear lives almost entirely in the future, in the imagined scenarios of things going wrong, in the what-ifs and the worst cases. But the present moment, the actual now, is almost always manageable, almost always bearable. The catastrophes you fear are rarely happening right now. They're happening in thought, in imagination, in the mind's elaborate simulations of possible futures. And when you can recognize this, when you can see that you're suffering not from what's happening, but from what you're thinking about what might happen, you can make a choice. You can choose to come back, to drop the story, to return to the simple reality of this breath, this moment, this direct experience of being alive. And in this return, there's relief. The burden of the imagined future lifts. The pressure to control what cannot be controlled releases. You can rest in what is, rather than struggling with what might be. This doesn't solve practical problems. If there's a real challenge facing you, you'll still need to address it. But you can address it from a place of presence and clarity, rather than from a place of panic and projection. You can think through your options, plans, take action when action is needed. But you can do all of this without the additional suffering of constant worry, of living in a perpetual state of alarm, of treating uncertainty as catastrophe. And uncertainty, it turns out, is not actually a problem to be solved. It's a condition to be accepted. Because uncertainty is fundamental to existence. You cannot know what will happen. You cannot guarantee outcomes. You cannot eliminate all risk or protect yourself from all possible harm. This is true for everyone, always. The feeling that others have certainty, that they're more secure or more in control, that's largely illusion. Everyone is navigating the unknown. Everyone is making their way through a life that offers no guarantees. The only question is whether you'll exhaust yourself fighting against this reality, or whether you'll learn to make peace with it. Making peace with uncertainty doesn't mean you become passive or fatalistic. It means you stop adding the suffering of resistance on top of the unavoidable discomfort of not knowing. It means you develop the capacity to take action, to make choices, to move forward even without certainty about how things will turn out. Because waiting for certainty means waiting forever. It means never starting, never trying, never risking, never fully engaging with your life. And that's not safety, that's imprisonment. True safety, the kind that actually supports well-being, is not about eliminating all risk or controlling all variables. It's about knowing that you can handle what comes, that you have resources, internal and external, that you're not alone, that difficulty is temporary, that you've survived before and you can survive again. This is resilience. This is strength. Not the absence of vulnerability, but the capacity to be vulnerable and keep going anyway. And this capacity, this resilience, it's not something you either have or don't have. It's something you can cultivate, something you can strengthen, something you can practice. Every time you face something that frightens you and come through it, every time you choose presence over avoidance, every time you offer yourself compassion instead of criticism, every time you reach out for support instead of isolating, every time you acknowledge your fear without letting it dictate your choices, you're building resilience. You're proving to yourself that you're capable. You're expanding your sense of what's possible. And over time, this accumulates. The small moments of courage, the tiny choices toward growth rather than safety, the gradual expansion of your comfort zone, the slow strengthening of your capacity to tolerate discomfort. And one day, you look back and realize how far you've come, how much you've grown. How many things that once terrified you are now simply part of your life, manageable, workable, no longer carrying the charge they once did. This is the journey, not a linear path from fear to fearlessness, but a spiral of deepening understanding, of gradually more skillful relationship with your own experience. You'll still feel afraid, that never completely goes away. But the fear becomes less consuming, less overwhelming, less definitive of who you are and what's possible for you. It becomes one feeling among many, one voice in the conversation, rather than the only voice that matters. And in the spaces between fear, in the moments when the alarm isn't ringing and the worry isn't pressing, you can notice what else is here. The warmth of sunlight, the comfort of breath, the pleasure of movement, the satisfaction of accomplishment, the joy of connection, the beauty that exists alongside the difficulty, the goodness that persists despite the threat, the reasons, small and large, to continue, to persist, to choose life again and again, even knowing its costs and limitations. Because life, for all its challenge, for all the fear it generates, is also astonishing. The fact that matter organized itself into consciousness, that atoms arranged themselves into awareness, that the universe gave birth to beings capable of reflecting on their own existence. This is miraculous. And you are part of it. You are the universe becoming aware of itself. You are stardust that learned to wonder and worry and hope and dream. Your fear is part of this too, part of the intricate dance of being alive, of being a creature that can anticipate and remember and imagine and protect. It's not a flaw in the design, it's a feature. Perhaps an over-eager feature, perhaps one that sometimes works against you. But fundamentally, essentially, a feature that exists because your existence matters, because life found you important enough to protect, because the long arc of evolution culminated in this moment, in you reading these words, being present to your own experience, capable of reflecting on fear itself. And now, as this exploration comes to a close, as these words settle into quiet, perhaps you can take a moment to notice how you feel, to check in with your body, with your breath, with the quality of your awareness in this moment. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do, no problem you need to solve right now. You can simply rest here, simply be here. Simply allow yourself to exist without striving or fixing or protecting. The fear will return. It always does. That's its nature. But now perhaps you understand it a little better. You see it not as an enemy, but as a misguided protector. You recognize its voice without believing every word it says. You know that you're larger than your fear, deeper than your anxiety, more resilient than your worry suggests. You carry within you the capacity to handle whatever comes. Not perfectly, not without difficulty, but adequately. Enough, and that's all you need. Not perfection, not fearlessness, not complete control or total certainty. Just enough courage to show up, enough compassion to be kind to yourself, enough trust that you can handle this moment, this breath, this single next step, and then the next, and then the next. One moment at a time, one choice at a time, one breath at a time, building a life that's yours. Imperfect and uncertain and sometimes frightening, but also beautiful, also meaningful, also worth living. The brain creates fear because it wants you here, and you are here, right now, present, alive, aware, and that is enough. That has always been enough. That will always be enough. Rest now. Breathe easily. Let the day release its hold. Let the worries soften and fade. Let yourself be held by this moment, by this breath, by the simple fact of your own existence. You are safe enough. You are okay enough. You are enough. And tomorrow, whatever it brings, you'll meet it as you've met everything else, with the resources you have, with the resilience you've built, with the compassion you're learning to offer yourself, with the understanding that fear is just fear, and you are so much more than your fear, so much more. Sleep well, rest deeply, trust that you will continue, because you always have, because you know how, because that's what you do. You continue, you persist, you show up to your life again and again, imperfectly and courageously and beautifully human. This is enough. You are enough. Rest now. Good night.